Welcome to the Really Useful Podcast. I'm Christian Corley, and I'm joined this week by my Make Use Of colleague, James Frew. Hi, James. How's it going?
Yeah, pretty good. Thanks, Christian. How you doing?
Yeah, not bad. We've got plenty to talk about this week. And in this week's Really Useful Podcast, this is the Tech Podcast for Technophobes. We will be looking at a number of recent news items that have popped along. So stay tuned to learn about Google's natural disaster alerts, Spotify stations, some news from the recent Apple announcements, some grammar checkers, some positivity apps, and some recent giveaways that we have at makeuseof.com. But first of all, let's have a look at these Google's natural disaster alerts. They launched SOS alerts in 2017 in an effort to help people in a crisis. And now they've updated this with in a number of new ways. So if you're in the path of a hurricane, for example, Google will display a crisis notification which will direct you to a hurricane forecast predicting the storm's trajectory, which is really useful, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the best things is that we have this up-to-date knowledge in our hands. But like, if you're just wandering around, you're not going to be constantly searching, is there an emergency happening right now? It kind of needs to be put in your face, right?
Yeah.
So anything that Google can do to keep you alerted and aware and make sure that you're sort of able to get to some place of safety in time is incredible.
Yeah, and keep you alive even.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, these are important things.
Yeah, so there's earthquake notifications, hurricane notifications, and flood warnings as well for affected areas around the world. Obviously, there's particular parts of the world that are more prone to natural disasters due to population. So yeah, that's really useful stuff. And I mean, it'd be really interesting to find out how that actually helps as well. The fact that like someone's phone in like 18 months, 2 years time, once the data is collected, how someone's phone has saved maybe not just one, like maybe like an entire village.
Yeah, absolutely. And the if you're using it in Google Maps, it'll then actually try and direct you away from the danger, so it'll redirect your path as well automatically. So it's not like you have to go, oh goodness, where am I going? It will try and work it out for you so that you can just get away as quick as possible.
Yeah, it's great stuff. It's a great development. It's one of those nice Google things as well. One of those rare nice Google things these days.
Yes, yeah.
It's feeling like Google's just sat on your shoulder staring at you. So yeah, you don't want to do that. No, put the money there.
Yeah, it's an altruistic thing, but given their reasonably monopolistic position in the smartphone world, I think it's a good thing that they're at least doing it.
Absolutely. Okay. Now let's move on. Are you familiar with Pandora?
Do you know, I've not really used it because I think we're both based in the UK and it's not really available here. But I do remember before streaming was a big thing, probably in the early 2000s or 2004, 2005, Pandora didn't like geo-block. And so I remember using it around that time.
Yeah, I was using it around 2008, 2009 before it got blocked.
Yeah.
And I found an incredible selection of music I'd never come across before.
Yeah. That's the thing with digital music, is like the discovery is so important because you know the things you already like. But one of the best things about music is being able to discover new stuff. And I remember that iTunes, which I guess we'll be talking about later as well, had a Genius function around the same time. So you'd load up your music and it would make curated playlists based on these artists are all kind of similar. This is the kind of thing that you'd like. Here you go. Here's a thing for you to listen to. Yeah. And Pandora was always kind of the same, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. Last FM was doing it as well. I think I switched to Last FM after Pandora got blocked outside of the US. But I mean, I've gone back to Pandora. My account's still there, and with a VPN, I can just go back to Pandora and listen to the old tracks. I found it remarkable because I particularly like kind of British blues music from the 60s or late 60s. So I found these incredible groups I'd never heard of before, and like I'd mentioned them to my parents, and it's like a bolt out of the blue in some cases, or in other cases, complete bewilderment. So Spotify started testing a new app called Stations. It was launched initially in 2018, curiously in Australia.
I'm assuming they just had easy access to the song rights there.
Yeah, exactly. It must have been a rights thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's now a free app that offers a Pandora-like experience. So you select a playlist to play or create one from scratch, and the music starts playing, leaving you to do other things. And you can give songs a thumbs up or a thumbs down, which will affect the songs that you then subsequently listen to. Spotify once more kind of tightening their grip on the streaming of music. Really, user curated music streaming.
I mean, I like the idea of it. I'm not quite sure why it needs to be a separate app, but there you go. I suppose maybe because it's quite simple and anyone can just use it, and it's kind of like it's taking one of the more basic features of Spotify and just sort of putting it somewhere else so that anybody can use it. You don't have to get involved in all the technicalities of Spotify. You can just sort of press play and you'll learn what you like.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Spotify themselves are saying that they routinely conduct a number of experiments to create better listening experiences for their users. Some of those tests end up paving the way for broader user experience, and others serve only as an important learning. Spotify Stations is one of those tests, which would mean either they'll give up on it or they'll integrate it, I suspect.
Yeah, it's a bit like the Google Inbox app from a few years ago. Which they kind of integrated a few features into Gmail and then killed Inbox.
Indeed, yeah. Okay, so that's Spotify Station. Now, as ever, everything that we speak about in the Really Useful podcast and probably a few other things will be included in the show notes. So all you need to do is just wherever you've got this podcast from, or visit makeuseof.com, iTunes, wherever, scroll down and you should find the relevant links. Just click them and you can just catch up, find out exactly what we're talking about. Apple had a big announcement last week, more or less within an hour of us recording last week's Really Useful podcast, which is why we didn't include it. iTunes is about to die, which for many of us, those of us on Windows, that's great because it's been a kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Millstone? Is millstone around the neck? Is that the right phrase? Or
sounds about right.
Yeah, it's been a pain, hasn't it, using iTunes on a Windows computer? It hasn't been a reliable, consistent experience as it is on Mac OS and Mac OS X before that. So, I mean, it's kind of mixed. They're breaking it up into kind of 3 constituent apps, which if you've been using iOS, I think you've probably spotted that coming anyway, haven't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the most notable one was Apple Podcasts got spun off a few years ago.
Yeah.
To break into the ever popular podcasting realm, so that you can have a separate app for that. Then Apple Music came along as their Spotify alternative, and now the newest one is moving movies and films and things into a dedicated Apple TV app.
Yeah.
And then that pretty much ties off all of the things that iTunes used to be used for. So if you did have an iTunes library, though, you can now find that in the Apple Music app. So Apple Music is a streaming service, but is also an app where you can access your purchased content. So
a bit like, if you're using Windows, a bit like the Amazon, or even iOS, it's a bit like the Amazon Music app in that respect, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Apple Podcasts will bring 700,000 of the best entertainment, comedy, news, and sports shows to your Mac. Have we got any news on what's going to happen with the Windows version of iTunes? They seem to be very focused on the Mac version.
I think it's staying for now.
Right.
I think that's the idea.
Makes sense, I suppose.
Yeah, because they're not going to release 3 different apps for Windows. I mean, even iTunes has barely been updated in the same way that the Mac version has over the years. Yeah.
And I mean, there is. I mean, as a note, I mean, there's still that little Bonjour app is still part of the iTunes installation, isn't it? All these years later, when for
completely unnecessary.
Yeah, exactly. For certainly at least 5 years, and probably I don't know, 13, 14 years. Probably don't know. But yeah, it's still there. It has other purposes, but it is generally a waste of time. The other thing that was announced at WWDC 2019 is that Apple's launching a new operating system specifically for iPads called iPadOS. Now, I had initially thought this was just for iPad Pros, but it seems to be for all iPads.
Yeah, it sounds like a pretty good deal, actually.
Yeah.
Because one of the hardest things about tablets in general, whether it's Android or iOS, has always been that they've been like just a bigger smartphone, but not as big as your computer. And so there's never really been a particular reason to go to one of those devices. But over the past few years, Apple's been positioning the iPad and certainly the iPad Pro as like a computer replacement, so that you can take it around with you. It's light, but you can attach Bluetooth keyboards, but you could do all your work on it. But still using single apps, no proper multitasking, it's still been a bit awkward to do it on there. Yeah. And the idea should be now that iPadOS breaks it away from the smaller iPhone devices and means that they can actually have something that is developed specifically for the tablet and for sort of the future of working, really.
That they're positioning it as, you know, there's better support for the Apple Pencil, and it has desktop class browsing with Safari. And new text editing. I am wondering whether they've looked at what Samsung have done with DeX and thought that they can do that with the iPad, but they need a bit of a new OS to do it. So I would not be surprised to see that coming into iPadOS.
Now, the thing that was most interesting for me that I can't see on our article here, but I'm sure I remember reading that the Files app can now actually download files, because I've been using an iPad for recipes recently, and I've got a PDF of recipes that I want to cook from, right? But you cannot download anything directly to the device.
Oh.
So you always have to look at it in an app, which means then you can't search it. You can't save it there. It is the most frustrating thing that I have ever come across, because I just want to save it to the device so I can search it for the recipe I'm looking for. But theoretically, this change to files, if I'm recalling it right, should mean that you can download things and actually use them locally on the device rather than always having to go to the cloud to find it.
That'd be useful, wouldn't it? Yeah. Yeah, I've noticed that. My wife has an iPad, and it does feel for something that's so lightweight and powerful that the operating system does have some annoying restrictions, such as that. So yeah, that'll be good if they can bring that. Check out the show notes for more on that. Okay, we're going to move on to some tips now. I don't think it really matters whether you're writing articles on the internet or you're writing reports or you're doing schoolwork or whatever. Grammar is pretty important, regardless of what language, but we're specifically talking about English. It's not a necessity, as our colleague Megan Ellis writes, in everyday life, and certainly not in conversation. But, you know, for printed documents or submissions, it looks professional, it feels professional, and I've been writing for a while, and I think the better the grammar and the more confident you are in the quality of it, overall the better your writing's going to be. Do you use any grammar checking tools before we roll into this?
I do, actually. It's the first one on this list. Yeah.
Grammarly.
So I guess, yeah. So I was looking for something, as people may know, we write for a predominantly US-based publication, and so we use US English.
Yeah.
But we're both British writers, and so my default is always the British isms and British words and British spellings. Yeah. And a few years ago, this was becoming a particular problem for me. Many editors sending me feedback going, you've written the wrong thing, you've written the wrong thing, you've included a U where there isn't one. And after some research, I found that Grammarly was probably going to be the best one to help me pick out those things and maybe more naturally over time develop an eye for it.
I think I've used Grammarly, and many years ago when I self-published, crowd-published a book of reviews and commentary of a popular British time travel adventure series.
Oh, I wonder what that could be.
Yeah, I have no idea. Danger Mouse, no. And I wasn't impressed with what Grammarly brought back for me. It seemed to bring up problems where there weren't problems and ignore places where there were problems. So I think when it gets to, I think you've got to get the length right, haven't you? I think if you're talking a book length document, I mean, to start off with, you need grammar checking, but I think you need to be doing what I generally do, which is use my word processor for the grammar checking.
Yeah.
And make sure I've got particular specifications set up. I use Word most of the time at the moment, and there's various settings you can set in Word to, get the grammar right, get the formatting right as well. So I generally use that. I think Grammarly is good for long documents, but not for book length material.
No, and if you paste something into it, it removes all the formatting, and then it starts getting confused. Like, so one of the things that we have is when you've got a header and you've pasted it from your word processor into there, it removes the spaces and dumps all the words next to each other, and then obviously it calls out, "There's no spaces here." You're like, "Yes or no," because there's a header there.
You just killed them. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not flawless, but it's probably the one that fitted into my workflow the best. Yeah. And I think in many of these cases, even the ones that we go through later on, is the same thing. It's going to depend on how you intend to use it and maybe a bit of trial and error. So you try a couple of them, see how it works, find the one that fits for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the list, we've got After the Deadline, which is an open source grammar checker, which I think is, if it's not actually integrated, you can integrate it into WordPress in order to, check your grammar. Oh yeah, developed by Automatic, the same company behind WordPress. The tool has a level of trust that many other free grammar checkers don't. Yeah, I've definitely used it in WordPress. We have Ginger, a grammar and punctuation checker. There's Pro Writing Aid, a grammar checker for writers and professionals. That will be us. Maybe check that out. And Scribens.
Scribens, I guess. Scribens?
Scribens, I don't know.
I suppose Scribens makes more sense.
Yeah. Which is a free grammar checker for students.
So the interesting thing that I forgot to mention about Grammarly is you do, and it's a cloud-based service. So everything you write in there is going to be submitted to them. And clearly that's a privacy concern to most people. I've kind of made my peace with it because I use it for professional work only. I don't use it for more personal things like emails and stuff. But the specific thing about Scribens, I'm going to go with Scribens, is that it does this locally and it doesn't transfer any of the text to servers, which means that it's particularly good and well suited for academics because it means that there's no movement of intellectual property, because if you're writing a academic paper or something that's going to be submitted for a patent or something like that, you really don't want that data getting released anywhere else.
Totally. Yeah. I mean that's an entirely kind of, I think for most people, unseen dimension of using a grammar checker, isn't it?
Indeed, yeah.
So there's 5 tools to check your grammar, and as mentioned, you can use your word processor as well. That will, if you find the right command in there. In Word, I think it's just F7 does a spelling and grammar check by default. Okay, positivity apps to manage mental health and boost your spirits. I'm at a slight disadvantage here. I don't have massive experience of relying on apps for anything other than kind of purely functional activities. So I'm just going to quickly run through this and then we'll have a chat. So we have No 0 Days, which gives you how useless a day may seem. You can make a difference by doing one small step, which is a nice philosophy. I have Nail, both these for Android and iOS. It's a mood tracking journal with voice notes. Sort of an emotional diary that you can use. We have Empty Your Cup, which is a web tool, which is a daily microblog of positive wisdom. Skills, which is a mindfulness and stress reduction games collection for Android and iOS. Actually, that sounds quite cool. And we have Care Cards, which is a web tool, positive self-care reminders. These have been compiled by our colleague Mihir Patkar. They look good, and as I noticed, that collection of games, I think that's something I might have a look into. Just I'm a parent to 3 children, so that anything that reduces stress is quite useful.
Indeed.
I feel.
And gamifying things is a fun way to do it as well, because it turns it from. So, giving another example that people might be more familiar with, the language app Duolingo kind of gamifies learning languages. Now, you might remember at school, you just had to learn a text by rote and say, this is this word, this is what it means, this is this word, and here's a sentence. And it's not necessarily the way that everybody learns or finds the most useful. And it turns it into possibly a bit of a tedious task. So gamifying something like stress reduction means that you're not having to add yet another task that adds to your stress. Like, oh god, goodness, I've got to go and do this stress reduction app because otherwise, it's something that's meant to be fun, but also have the added benefit of some mindfulness and stress reduction.
Sure. So, I mean, have you used anything? So, have you used anything like this, or?
I've used a couple of habit building apps in the past, but they weren't very. I think it was more a problem with my planning. So I didn't have very. What's the words, like smart tasks to do? So it would be like too broad. So I'd end up marking it as complete, even though I couldn't really determine whether or not I'd completed something. And so it's not really the app's fault. It was more my fault. Not working harder to get it right. But I do find some of these kind of things quite helpful. I mean, I've written in the past about mindfulness apps, which, is sort of a similar subgenre of things. But it's that we've got this, to a lot of people, life can seem kind of inherently more stressful now, especially with smartphones, constant notifications, emails, having to take work home with you and stuff. But what's nice about, about lists like this is that it shows that your phone doesn't just have to be a stress device. It's not just constantly, you've got to be doing something, you've got to be productive, you've got to be working. There's other things you can do with it too. And some of that involves sort of being more positive and helping you have a better day, hopefully.
Yeah, I've been in and outing an app called Grasshopper, which teaches you how to code, which is a completely different angle on this. But again, it's using your phone to kind of in a different way. And I found that kind of useful. But again, I end up just not have vast periods of time not using it at all. And although it's, you can't progress unless you've completed particular stages. You can't cheat it, but at the same time, it is a kind of topic I find difficult to kind of retain. So I do if I don't get into it after like a week or so, if I ignore it for a bit, then I think time passes, and I less likely want to give it any attention because I'm going to go back and do things and try it again. So I can retain it for like half an hour or so, but after that it's gone. I don't know. I've just got this mental block with coding.
It's a difficult thing to learn, especially because they're it's not, when you're wandering around your day, like you might be able to repeat Spanish phrases in your head, for example, but you don't really have the same way to do that with coding, do you? It's a bit like learning maths.
Well, it's funny because HTML, when I first started learning HTML, that really, I just couldn't handle it. And then I discovered its origins in terms of markup, and then bang, I had it completely. Understood everything about it and its purpose. Same with CSS. Once I understood its relation to the HTML files and where it comes in, and the hierarchy was the main problem. Once I got that, I had it. But anything more complicated than that, whether it's Java or ASP or PHP, I just can't, or Python, even I can't handle it at all. I just cannot retain it. It's a strange thing. I think it's the whole. We're obviously getting way off topic here, but I think it's the whole arrays thing, that aspect of that, just that declaration, that just, and it's the seemingly arbitrary names that things are given. I think that's what kills it for me. So anyway, back to this mindfulness and mental health management and boosting your spirits using just a phone, which, given the importance of keeping a positive mental attitude and having a good work, life, leisure balance, having something that can do that in your pocket, that's quite useful, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that because the title here is obviously manage your mental health, and one of the key ways you can do that is by reminding yourself of positive things. That's why there's so many positive inspirational quotes on Instagram and that sort of stuff. But sometimes positivity can only go sort of so far, it's not a failure, but some days you'll just wake up and feel like, yeah, okay, I've seen that quote, but I still don't feel any more motivated, any more positive, or any better. And that can be really tough. And while we were off air last month, but that was Mental Health Awareness Month, and then there was Mental Health Awareness Week at the end. And sometimes you would be feeling down and you feel like you can't really talk to anyone about that. And there are two organizations that I'm going to just highlight here that do incredible work for when you want to be able to talk about these kind of thoughts and feelings that are getting you down, but you don't necessarily want to talk to the people around you about them. So in the US, there's the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and in the UK, there's the Samaritans. So the Suicide Prevention Lifeline is available 24 hours a day, and that's on 1-800-273-8255. And you can also go on their website and do a live chat. And in the UK, the Samaritans is on 116-123, and that's a free phone number as well. And those people will be able to talk to you confidentially about however you're feeling. And so while you can do your best with managing your mental health with these apps and things, it's also important that you know that you don't have to struggle through a day if you're not feeling it. There's always people around that you can talk to as well.
Absolutely. And as ever, anything that you've learned from the show that's vital will be included in the show notes, including those numbers, as James mentioned. We'll move on from there. We've got some giveaways running on makeusesoft.com as ever, but the giveaways that James and I are both involved in. Now, the one that I'm going to talk about very briefly, first of all, isn't live yet, but I've completely forgotten what it is. Oh, yeah, that's right. I've been using a device called a pluggable UD cube or USB-C docking station cube. What it is, it's a very small box, like 65 by 35 by 55 millimeters. It's USB-C compatible, and you can connect any USB-C compatible laptop or hybrid tablet or Android tablet to it and use it as a docking station. And it's really, really useful because the size is really cool. If you're the type of person who uses the same workspace all the time, having a docking station with hard drives connected and stuff, that's really useful. So there's a giveaway coming along for that at makeusesoft.com, and it's also compatible with Android devices. And while it will only mirror the majority of Android devices, if you're using a Samsung Galaxy with DEX, which we mentioned earlier on, which is a desktop environment, then you can hook that up and bang your Samsung Galaxy S8 or later, or Samsung Galaxy Note 8 or later, or Samsung Galaxy Tab S4 or S5e, more or less turns into a PC. So that's, you get a full desktop experience using DEX, and you can even use the tablet or phone touchscreen as a keyboard and touchpad. Now, this is something that's built into the Samsungs, but having a useful little cube that just turns into a docking station, where docking stations have traditionally been they're restricted to a particular device or range of devices. So to have something that's just completely open that anyone can just plug into, that's really, really cool. So there's a giveaway coming along for that in the next few days. But James, tell us about the Gladius mini underwater drone, because that sounds awesome.
Yes, and it pretty much is. So this came about, we were at CES earlier this year, and we will be there at IFA, which is in Berlin, and then CES next year. But we came across this underwater drone and decided to try it out and give it a review. Now, the good thing is the company was kind enough to give us one of them to give away to any of you listeners, readers, viewers, whichever way you're coming to us in. And it is a $1,500 device, but it allows you to explore underwater. I mean, it was really fun to use. It's a little device. It's probably about the size of a laptop, a bit heavier than that. Has a 4K camera for video and a 12 megapixel for photos. And it comes with a 50-meter tether. So you've got a pretty big depth that you can go down. It can go down to 100 meters, but it comes with a 50-meter tether, and you can buy the 100. And yeah, it was just really cool to go and do some exploring with it. Now, the only thing that I would say about it is that if you've got sort of poor lighting conditions in the water that you're going to use it in, maybe it's not the most useful device. So I tried it in a lake in London and basically got unusable footage. You couldn't really see anything. But if it's a clear day and the water is clear, you're going to get incredible footage from it because the video quality is very good. And yeah, we've got one of them to give away. And excellent. The competition opened last week, and so I think it's probably got another 2 weeks from when you're hearing that. So today's the 10th, and I think this is going out on the 11th or 12th. Yeah. And it'll probably be about another 2 weeks from that.
Excellent. So yeah, head over to makeuseof.com. Obviously, it'll be in the show notes, and you can enter that, and you can get multiple entries with any makeuseof.com competitions using the competition widget at the foot of the review. And don't forget to check James's video review to accompany that to get a proper look at the Gladius Mini 4K underwater drone. Wow, $1,500. That's awesome. That.
See, that's the thing. It sounds expensive, but then when you compare it to other underwater devices, it's actually pretty reasonable. So
Really?
Yeah.
I don't think the only thing I've reviewed that comes close to that is the Librem 13 laptop, I think.
Which I was very jealous of.
Yeah, it's a beautiful device. It really is very nice. Yeah. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this week's really useful podcast. As we always say, and I seem to forget, the tech podcast for technophobes. If you have any questions about anything we've discussed or any topics that are causing you problems, or if you have, by all means, get in touch with us, send us a message. And if you have a friend or colleague or relative who would benefit for some clarity with recent tech events, put them in our direction, share the link with them, and hello to you, new listener. We've got a new show coming next week, and obviously we've got 20 previous episodes for you to catch up on as well. And you can subscribe to us via iTunes, Spotify, Transistor. You can find us on the Make Use Of website, and you'll even find us on YouTube and pretty much anywhere else that you can find podcasts these days. Big thanks to the Make Use Of management for hosting us on the site, and it's goodbye from myself, Christian Corley, and from James Frew. We'll be back next week for a new really useful podcast. Until then, goodbye.